Well, welcome everybody. It's 12:30 p.m. on the east coast of Australia and 10:30 a.m. in Kuala Lumpur, so we will get underway. Welcome to this short Asialink webinar. I'm Donald Greenlees, Asialink Senior Advisor. It's been another exciting and tumultuous week in Malaysian politics. We've seen the resignation of Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin, and although he remains on as caretaker while a new Prime Minister is found, Malaysia soon will have its third Prime Minister in just over 3 years. There is a lot at stake in the choice of a new PM. Malaysia is at a critical juncture. It has been hard hit by the COVID pandemic. And I've read that it is Southeast Asia's worst hit on a per capita basis, with about 20,000 COVID cases emerging a day. Malaysia also suffers severe economic headwinds. Its hopes of achieving rich world income status already have been set back by some years. It was on track to achieve that milestone last year. The World Bank, in a recent report, is now saying it won't happen till sometime between 2024 and 2028. And of course, there are a lot of people suffering hardship right now. There are also rumblings that the upheavals in Putrajaya might make the time right for a new kind, a new type of politics that overcomes traditional societal divides and establishes stronger and cleaner governance. We have about 30 minutes of Q&A to explore those topics. We've already received a number of questions from the audience, and we have two excellent guests with us to try to answer them. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania. James is also a fellow at the Jeffrey Chaya Institute in Malaysia, and Hadi Azmi, an independent reporter in Kuala Lumpur. Hadi frequently contributes to Bloomberg, Radio Free Asia and Benar News on Malaysian current events. James and Hadi, thank you both very much for joining us. Let's start with the selection of a new Prime Minister. There are a lot of manoeuvres happening as we speak. As I understand it, the King and fellow royals are due to meet at 2:30 p.m. KL time to discuss the leadership. How quickly do you think we're likely to see a new Prime Minister appointed, and is there a favourite emerging already? And if I can start with you on that front, James.
Very good afternoon, Don, and thank you so much for the kind invitation to speak. So I think what will happen this afternoon is that over the past 2 days, the Malaysian King has gone through the list of statutory declarations. So all the MPs in Malaysia were asked to submit a statutory declaration, basically to indicate who they think should be the next prime ministers. I think the King will go through the list carefully. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, he's actually called up some of the MPs individually to double check that their submission was correct. So this afternoon is basically a private discussion among all the 9 sultans in Malaysia. And Malaysia has a special, unique system in the world where the King is rotated among the 9 sultans. Each of them serve for a 5-year term. So this thing is formally called the Conference of Rulers. It's actually named in the Malaysian Constitution. It's quite a unique body. There's no other country that has this body. So basically, they will go through the list, statutory declaration list. They will have a private discussion among themselves on who they think can command the confidence of Parliament and who they think can sustain the government, not only now, but throughout the COVID crisis. So I think they will come to a decision this afternoon. My understanding is that this is there's only one meeting that's scheduled. In other words, they will decide at this meeting. And after that, it's just a matter of time before they announce whoever is their preferred candidate.
Now, I don't want to dwell on this too long because we will know soon enough and we can be a little patient. But if I can just turn to you, Hadi, from your contacts in KL, do you see a favourite emerging at this stage? Who do you think we're likely to see come out of this as Prime Minister?
Well, as far as we know, 114 MPs in Malaysia's 222-seat parliament has already pledged for Ismail Sabri Yaakob, who was the Deputy Prime Minister in the previous government. So he is the likely person to be named Prime Minister. In fact, yesterday the King called 114 MPs who are believed to support Ismail Sabri to come, like Professor James said, to come to the palace personally, where the King asked them personally whether they really want Ismail Sabri to be the Prime Minister. So as it stands right now, that is where the MPs are. They want Ismail Sabri to take over. But that does not necessarily translate to what the Malaysian public wants, of course.
Now, next to Dr. Mahathir, Anwar Ibrahim is probably the best known Malaysian politician outside the country, and certainly here in Australia. Is this a make it or break it moment, Hadi, for Anwar? If he doesn't get there this time, we thought he might even get there last year. He was very optimistic around last September that he might actually get the job. Is this his last chance to really get the Prime Ministership?
Well, people have said that in the last election and the one before that, it's a running joke in Malaysia that Anwar is the perpetual Prime Minister in waiting. He's always the next Prime Minister. So I'm not sure whether this is the end of the line for him. Of course, there's a lot of people in Malaysia that wants to move on from this whole business of Mahathir versus Anwar, which has been the running political story of Malaysia since the 1990s, since 1998. But Anwar is still a popular person in Malaysian politics. He is highly respected, highly regarded. Just that he is unable to convince the rest of the MPs to come and support him this time around. I've heard that people suggest that he should not contest in the next election and instead give chance to younger candidates. But he still has a pull in Malaysian politics that I think it wouldn't be a surprise if he decided to stay on again for the next election.
Well, Hadi, if I could just bring in James on that point, and maybe throw the same question to James. And do you think this is Anwar's last stand? But in addition to that, we have a question from a member of our audience who has pointed out that there are rumours swirling around that Najib Razak could make a comeback. And I wonder how the public might perceive somebody tarnished for misappropriating such amounts of money being reinstated into office. So what's your take on that, James?
Right. In terms of Anwar Ibrahim, I do expect him to stay on as the leader of PKR and the Alternative Coalition. I also expect him to lead the Alternative Coalition Pakatan Harapan into the next general election. The reason I say that is because for a very practical reason, if you were to remove Anwar, there's really nobody in PKR who has the same stature who can step up. You have to remember it's not only the PKR leadership that you're talking about, it's also the leadership of the Pakatan Harapan, the coalition government. At the present moment, Anwar is the only person who can pull DAP Amanah together and lead the coalition. So I see him holding on to the leadership at least until the next general election. And to answer your second question about Najib, Najib has never really been out of the game. So even though he was pulled out as a prime minister, he's still widely seen as a thought leader in UMNO. A lot of people UMNO tell me he's still the smartest guy. Every time they have a strategy meeting, he comes up with something very new and innovative. So he's still a thought leader. As to whether he'll be given a position in the new government, assuming it's an UMNO government, my answer is no. He will not be given a new position in UMNO or formal position in the government, but he will remain a very, very influential figure. He will make a comeback after all the court cases are settled. So it's a question of waiting for the legal process to go through and whether he'll win the appeal or he'll get something else. But once the legal process is over, I don't doubt that he will make a comeback.
Now, Hadi, if I could throw back to you on that point, and one thing that seems very clear is that we're not seeing any fresh faces. All the candidates have been around for a long time, they're well known. Do you think inevitably the public will be disappointed by the outcome? One audience member actually said in a question yesterday saying that younger Malaysians think it's time for politicians like Mahathir and Anwar to step down, leave the political scene, but there just don't seem to be any alternatives to inspire the younger generation.
Yeah, the sentiment among young voters is exactly that. People are tired of the same old people running the country. You know, I was still in primary school when Anwar and Mahathir was the big names in politics, and I'm 34 this year, and they are still the biggest name in politics. So we definitely have stagnated in terms of producing leaders. And it doesn't seem to be changing. Right now, the only party that seems to be open to bring in young talent into politics is DAP. But unfortunately, DAP has a baggage of being the Chinese party that is often demonized by the Malay, ruling politic establishment. So aside from that, there are a few. Recently, there's a new party that was being started up, literally called Muda Young. So they are made up of young people. It's a manifestation of the younger people's need to see representation of themselves in Malaysian politics, people who actually understand them. In Malaysia, the youth minister is a 50-year-old man. Ismail Sabri is 61, Anwar is 74. So we are all being run by the old people. And yeah, people want to see a change that is substantial, a change that really says change, not just like what I've heard somebody say is a change between Pepsi and Coke, which is essentially the same thing. So yeah.
The King has made it clear that Parliament must be recalled fairly quickly, and one of Muhyiddin's tactics in recent times is to keep delaying the recall of Parliament. The numbers for whoever becomes Prime Minister are going to be tested in the Parliament. Given the fractious nature of the relations between political parties, there are divisions between and within political parties. Is there a risk of a rolling crisis here where the King's choice of Prime Minister can't get a mandate on the floor of Parliament? Or alternatively, is the King's influence so great, his imprimatur so great, that MPs will just follow whatever the King wants because they don't want to challenge the King? And I'll turn that over to James and then come to you, Hadi.
Sure. So I think the King or the Royal Institution has been extremely careful. As Hadi mentioned, the King went and asked every one of those MPs who submitted an SD to support Ismail to confirm that they are actually going to support him. So in terms of the confidence vote, I'm quite certain that if it is Ismail Sabri, he will win it without any problem. The problem is not who's going to be the Prime Minister. The problem is the margin of victory. For the government to be stable, they basically need a margin that's around 125 and above. If your margin is anything less than 125, it means you only need a defection of 5 or 6 MPs and your government is in trouble. Having said that, I think because of the active intervention by the King, it is widely understood among the MPs that if the new government wins the confidence vote, they're not going to disturb the government too much because people keep forgetting the timeline. Because after the confidence vote, shortly 1 month after that will be the budget process. So the budget process will take up most of October, and basically by December everything will be cooling down because of the end of the year holidays. And in January, most people don't do any real politics because we're heading towards Chinese New Year. So basically, my argument is that if there's going to be a new government coming in, that government should have a short honeymoon period of 5 to 6 months before any real trouble comes, if there's going to be trouble.
Well, let's pick up on that point. And it would strike me that whoever is the new Prime Minister, they're going to need to get a mandate from the people fairly quickly, you would think, to establish the legitimacy of the government. And that's something obviously Muhyiddin did not have. How quickly do you think Malaysia will go back to the polls? The King has already said he doesn't want an election while COVID is still rampant. How soon will we go back to an election? And I'll start with you, Hadi, and then get your views on that, James.
Yeah, right now, COVID is the only reason why we're not in an election yet. If there was no COVID, we already been to polls already. But looking at the projection of the COVID case, we are still recording about 22,000 cases daily right now. And the projection from the health ministry shows that it's going to be quite a long second half of 2021, probably until the end of December. We're still going to see a lot of high cases. So I think earliest would be last week, Muhyiddin offered to call an election in July 2022 if people give support to him. And I think that seems like a reasonable date. If we're only considering about COVID, that is quite a reasonable date for election to be called. But if Ismail Sabri managed to get a full mandate, a strong mandate, there's no reason for him to, hold on to the mandate until the parliamentary term ends in 2023. He could justify saying that, he managed to stabilize the government, he managed to get a sizable majority support on his side. So why call an election?
Okay, now if I could just quickly get your view on that, James, and we'll move on to some other things. But what's your tip for the timing of an election?
I agree completely with Hadi. I think the earliest we're talking about is probably middle of 2021, but they might hold it earlier because the Sarawak state election is coming up. So they might hold it concurrently with the Sarawak state election. Everything will be dependent on, as I mentioned earlier, the margin of victory when the confidence vote is taken. And also there's also another important factor. If it is UMNO in charge, UMNO wants to go to the polls as soon as possible because they want to use the opportunity to wipe out the second Malay party, Bersatu. So there's every incentive for UMNO to go for early January election. But at the top of the list in terms of keeping an eye is the COVID thing. As long as the COVID is under control, I think they will go for elections sometime next year. And also the other important point is that I think it's widely expected, not only among the Malaysian public, but even among the political class, there's sort of a norm that's forming that, the only way out of the political crisis in Malaysia is a general election. Because in the last general election, among the Malay votes, it was quite interesting. The vote was split three ways. So we don't know who can actually speak for the Malay community. And the only way you can get a clear answer is if you go back to the people. So there's every incentive to go for early general election rather than wait until 2023.
Now, if I can just move on to the broad issue of governance, and this sort of looms in the background. Outside audiences are very familiar, I imagine, with the 1MDB scandal, and it made global headlines when we saw billions of dollars being redirected out of the National Development Fund. The shadow still hangs over Malaysian politics, and we just saw in July that Najib Razak was convicted and he's facing up to 12 years in jail. Is what we're seeing now, the political instability we're seeing now, a continued influence of that crisis in a sense? Muhyiddin himself said the loss of support, the defection of 15 UMNO MPs was directly the result of his refusal to come to the rescue of Najib and the president of UMNO, Zahid Hamidi. So how big a legacy, how big a shadow does it really cast over Malaysian politics still? And James, I would turn that one over to James. Yeah.
Okay. So my take is that the current crisis in terms of the 1MDB footprint, the answer is nothing. The Malaysian political elite has sort of completely washed their hands of the 1MDB crisis. The ordinary Malaysians are basically worried about two things: COVID and their rice bowl. because a lot of them have lost their jobs or have a reduced income. So they worry about the state of the economy. 1MDB is furthest from their mind. Mahathir had a very famous saying that Malaysians or the Malay people forget easily, and I think that's very, very true. 1MDB will not be an issue, but it might be an issue brought up if Najib is trying to make a comeback. But other than that, among the calculations, among the Malaysian political elite now, it is a non-issue.
Okay, but let's just carry the logic there forward. I mean, for the incoming PM, I mean, we've seen in South Korea, you know, most notably, former leaders have gone off to jail. I imagine it'd be a shocking thing for Malaysians to see a prime minister actually end up in jail, and let's see if that happens. But do you think it signals a new standard when it comes to governance? And how much of a wake-up call, James, is it to political leaders?
I don't think the current generation of political leaders have learned anything from the 1MDB crisis. My take is that the only way to progress in terms of political development in Malaysia is that you really have to move down one generation. The current generation of political leaders in Malaysia on both sides of the aisles have basically used out all the tricks. And it's no longer possible to bring Malaysia to the next level with the current generation of leaders. So we really have to skip maybe even 2 generations, move down to people in the 40s and early 50s. Basically, that this generation, they're so used to the old system, it's not possible for them to change, not only the way they work, their mindset. So basically, nobody has really learned anything from the 1MDB crisis.
What about the impact on patronage politics? The money tree where, you know, funds flow down, particularly UMNO, I think, was associated with this, flow down from the centre to the regions. Is there any prospect of getting money out of politics when it comes to the old systems of patronage, and how big a role do you think that would play at the next election? And I'll get you to follow up on that one, James.
Right. So my take is that money is one of the essential criteria in Malaysian politics. And what was really interesting was that during the first regime change, during the short period when Pakatan Harapan was in charge, there were already a lot of allegations that some of the Pakatan Harapan leaders started to get themselves involved in money politics as well. The reality is that there is no public funding for political parties in Malaysia, and politics in Malaysia, like everywhere else in the region, is an extremely expensive exercise. So money is a crucial clog in the system, and there's no way to remove it. I think the only way you can deal with the money issue is basically control what they call the public procurement side. In other words, control access to public procurement, because one of the issues you face in Malaysia and other countries in Southeast Asia is that people use the public procurement process, government contracts, as a place to skim money off to feed the political parties. I think you can do something in that area, but I think within the wider scheme of things, you really can't remove the money factor.
Now, Hadi, I'll come to you with your experience writing for Bloomberg. You're our finance economic guru here today. So tell me what you think about the impact that 1MDB has had on business and investor confidence, on the reputational legacy for Malaysia when it comes to foreign investment, because this is key to the recovery from COVID. In order to refire the economy, Malaysia is going to need foreign direct investment to achieve the sort of structural transition in the economy that advisors, including the World Bank, have been urging. So how much damage has it done?
Yeah, it's a huge stain on the Malaysian image. This whole 1MDB crisis. It's the biggest corruption case in history, and it's perpetuated by the Prime Minister himself, of all people. So in that sense, it is actually very damaging to Malaysia. But I think the fact that the Malaysian public kicked out Najib because of that, and he is eventually prosecuted and found and convicted for 1MDB, shows that there is Malaysia is not lost yet. There is still hope in Malaysia, but all these political uncertainties that comes after that, and we see people who are implicated with 1MDB. For example, Najib's stepson who received almost $1 billion, $1 billion, no, $1 billion ringgit from 1MDB being let free because of negotiations and not something that happened in the courtroom. So it is it damages the Malaysian reputation again. It was down, it went back up, it went down.
We used to hear about the Korea discount when it came to lack of transparency in corporate governance. And I'm wondering whether 1MDB has created a Malaysia discount when it comes to market values and the willingness of FDI, foreign investors to come in.
Yeah, definitely. A lot. Malaysia has been suffering in terms of FDI as of late. I'm sure there's a lot of reluctance to invest in Malaysia. 1MDB on one hand and the political uncertainty on one hand. We are losing out to our neighbors in the region. Malaysia used to be the top dog in the region, but now Indonesia is getting more. Vietnam is way ahead of us. Yeah, and we lose out from when the trade war between US and China happened. Malaysia was poised to gain a lot from all the businesses that is running away from China, but instead all of that went to Vietnam instead, and Indonesia and Singapore and Thailand, which is very unfortunate. But the market creates stability, and it's very surprising that on Monday after Muhyiddin's resignation, the Malaysian stock market went up 17 points, which is the highest it has been in a while. Malaysian stock market has been in the rate for a long time, and I think the market believes that Malaysia is more stable without a government than with one.
Well, just one more question before I sort of move on, but from the sort of governance issues, the legacy of 1MDB, and perhaps I can direct this to James. Najib is seen as a very wily politician. He's a great survivor. Is it possible that he might cut a deal with an incoming Prime Minister, especially if it's somebody like Sabri? And the current king is from Pahang, and Najib himself comes from an elite Pahang family. I gather he's been pushing the king for a pardon. What would be the public reaction to this? Is this in any way acceptable for Najib to be given a pardon?
I think the pardon rumor is probably not true. The reason I said it is because he's still got many trials to look forward to. So you can't talk about pardon until all the trials are completed. So there's a process to be followed. But in terms of cutting political deals, I think he will try. I mean, he did try with Muhyiddin, not very successful. But everything will be dependent on the makeup of this incoming government and also the sort of majority this government has. So if the government comes in with a very strong majority, then the Prime Minister will have more leeway dealing with Najib. If they're coming with a very small majority, then I think some sort of deals may be on the cards. But I would say that that is not on the priority of the government. I think if Najib is planning a comeback, he's not planning a comeback during the time of COVID. He's planning a comeback, much later in the future.
Now we're starting to run out of time, but I'd like to, and maybe we can just keep going for a few more minutes, because I'd like to cover the implications of the COVID pandemic and some of the fundamental underlying trends in politics, which I think in some ways overlap with what's happening with the pandemic. And I'd maybe start with Hadi in terms of painting a picture of how conditions are on the ground in Malaysia at the moment. As I understand it, the middle 40% have now become the middle 20%. We've seen a decimation of the middle class. Consequently, there've been calls for greater inclusiveness, a stronger social safety net, but Malaysia collects less tax than the OECD average. And so the implication is that Malaysia needs a stronger tax base. To you, Hadi, how hard is the situation that people are facing in the neighbourhoods and the heartland right now? And how important a policy change is it to reform the social safety net? And is Malaysia ready to accept the sort of wealth transfer, wealth distribution that implies?
Well, we talk back about the legacy of 1MDB. We used to have a GST for a while under Najib. We implemented the GST, which is, I think, something that is fundamentally necessary for Malaysia to increase its tax collection. But unfortunately, the GST system in Malaysia has been politicized. It was heavily linked with Najib. It was seen as Najib's effort to find money to cover whatever he stole from 1MDB. So yeah, GST has become a toxic topic in Malaysia now. But yeah, COVID has really decimated a lot of wealth from Malaysia. The worst affected is not necessarily the bottom 40, it's more of the middle 40 who are affected. Malaysia, there's a lot of Malaysia who works in informal employment, working small businesses, and these are the worst hit in due to COVID. So yeah, you're right. The middle 40 is now the middle 20 or even less. Some argue it's just the middle 5 now. And we are left with more people in the bottom 40 bracket. The government's effort to help people mostly is focused on the bottom 40, so the middle 40 was left out. And if we look at the salary range of salary in Malaysia, we are now back to 2016 level. We have wiped out 5 years of progress in that term. So yeah, things on the ground are really bad. People are suffering in ways that I have not seen before. People really don't have money left. People are digging through their retirement saving. Many people have emptied out their retirement saving because they need the money now. So it is going to be hard for them going forward.
And we're seeing food handouts, right? We're seeing food handouts to even middle-class people, right? Middle-class families.
Yeah, we had this thing a few months back that is a grassroots effort. We are telling people to fly a white flag outside of their house to indicate that you need aid, because it's a bit humiliating for people to admit that they don't have any food, don't have any money. So it's a silent, subtle way of asking for aid. You fly a white flag, somebody leaves food outside your door. You don't know who gave the food to you, they don't know who you are. So it has gone to that extent. People are begging for food. I personally was approached by a lot of people asking for aid. I know people. I live in a sort of a middle class neighborhood, but I know people around here who have to go diving into bins at night looking for food, for scraps. And yeah, this has never happened to Malaysia. Even 97, when the economic crisis hit the country, it was not this bad.
But James, you've written a little bit about the prospect of some sort of real root and branch fundamental changes in Malaysian politics. And I guess that's set against the backdrop of the sort of chaos we've seen in relation to the leadership and the political parlour games between the old personalities and the parties. And then also this sort of tragedy for people that Hadi has described. Do you think a new type of politics, and the King has called for a new type of politics, really is possible, or are the habits too entrenched? How feasible, and if so, how long will it take to bring about a new politics in Malaysia?
So as I mentioned earlier, new politics in Malaysia is not possible if the current generation is in charge. You need to skip 1 or 2 generations down. I've always argued consistently that the basic problem with Malaysia is that the ruling class in Malaysia, the Malay establishment, made a big mistake by going all out to promote this ideology of Ketuanan Melayu or Malay supremacy. I think there's really no need to look for new politics in Malaysia. Those of you old enough will remember what Malaysia was like before 1970. The reality is that Malaysia is a multi-racial, multi-religious country. And back in the 60s, Malaysia was actually a very successful country. In fact, it was much more successful than countries like Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, all the countries that have overtaken Malaysia. And I think the reality is that if you want Malaysia to go back on track and become a more progressive country, the political establishment in Malaysia must recognize that Malaysia is a multi-racial, multi-religious country, and that you should work on the strength of your diversity rather than promote this toxic ideology of Malaysia.
So what are the models there, James? One of our audience members sent in a question and was sort of interested in what the alternative models were and how realistic and viable they are. I mean, if you were looking at trying to achieve the things that you've described there, how do you go about it practically?
Sure. So it is not possible, as I mentioned, if the current generation is in charge. But if you will be able to move the politics down 1 or 2 generations, it is possible for you to set a different pathway for the country. If you were to adopt a more multi-racial approach, it is possible to bring the country forward. The problem with having ideology of Malay dominance is that this means that you shut out 30% or more than 30% of the population from everything, not only from the political decision-making process, but from every segment of the economy. So it is possible to go for a new Malaysia if you remember what Malaysia was like before 1970. In other words, every community will bring something to the table, and basically you work together as a group rather than spend all your time trying to exclude certain groups from the process.
Now, Tiamang, who's listening in, has sort of written, will they ever give up these privileges? I mean, the elites, the old elites, will they ever give up these privileges for the greater good of the country? I mean, it's great to sort of have these ambitions, but really how realistic, how practical is it?
So my argument is that they will not give up the current benefits. What we need is a crisis that is equal to what we had in Malaysia, and what they call the 13th of May crisis. Once you reach that sort of crisis, then they will start to think about building a completely new political structure. Only then things will change.
Or, isn't there a more profound crisis than the one we're in now? I mean, we've got COVID devastating the global economy and the local economy. People are dying. Yes. How big a crisis do you need?
Right. Well, my argument is that, yes, we're facing a huge crisis now, but if you are the top 10% of the Malaysian population, COVID-19 has really not affected you. I just want to remind your audience that one of the interesting stories going around Malaysia when COVID became a really serious issue was that there was all these stories circulating about how the elites took their private jets, went overseas to get the COVID jab. So this gives you an idea of how the elites can circumvent the system. And to be fair, right, this is not unique to Malaysia. We know that even in Australia, people are complaining that if you're a movie star or you're part of the 1% elite, you got your private jets, you can come in and can do your quarantine in a private home or whatever. So, if you're part of the elite, I think the way you look at the world is slightly different. And we really need a magnitude or something like the May 13 incident when the entire political structure cannot function anymore. That's when you have to rebuild from the ground up. Until we reach that level, unfortunately, things will not change in Malaysia.
Mm. We were talking the other day, James, about the example of the LDP in Japan and the capacity for them to sort of reinvent themselves after defeat. And I wonder whether we see the risk of an UMNO-dominated sort of BN-style coalition emerging, whether we could be back to the future. I mean, is this the moment for profound change, or is there still a risk that we could find that in a short period of time, it's back to the old days?
I think if Ismail Sabri becomes the prime minister, the number one priority for UMNO will be to destroy Bersatu. And the number two priority will be to turn the clock back to pre-2018 when Malaysia was ruled under the Barisan Nasional type of government. So
and
this will be the two top priorities.
Hadi, what do you make of that? Do you think that that's a real prospect? Could that happen?
Yeah, this is entirely, all this thing that happened to Malaysia is entirely because a bunch of old Malay guys who only know how to play politics one way can't accept any changes. Muhyiddin, he was from UMNO. He was kicked out from UMNO in 2016. He joined with Mahathir for 2 years, set up a new party, became opposition, and within 2 years' time, they are back in power. So they were never really an opposition. They didn't really go to the baptism of fire of being Malaysian opposition. And after just 2 years of working together in a multicultural, in a more multicultural government, they decided they can't stand this and they want to go back to how things were. Even if that means they have to go back to work with the people they kicked out from government in the first place. So, yeah, these old guys are not going to change. We can't expect them to change. It's unrealistic to hope for them to change. We are in a crisis. Yes, it's a crisis for the whole of Malaysia, but it's not a political crisis for the ruling elite. To them, this is just something that they can walk out from soon. So yeah, UMNO will definitely try to either destroy Bersatu or fold it back into UMNO, because going to election, you can't have two big Malay parties going after the same electorate. That would split the vote. UMNO wants the whole of the Malay votes for themselves. Yeah, so I agree with James. UMNO will destroy Bersatu one way or the other.
Now, former Australian High Commissioner to Malaysia, James Wise, points out that we haven't talked about the old Barisan Alliance, the MCA and MIC, and how they've fared in the past few years. How are they lining up in the current political manoeuvres? What impact are they likely to have? And let's go to you, James, on that question.
Right. So all the minor parties in the Barisan Nasional counts for 0 or less than 0. They're not, what do you call it? When they make decisions, it doesn't matter what they think. So basically, they count for less than 0 at the present moment.
All right. Now, gentlemen, I think we've gone beyond our originally allocated time. So we'll I think wrap up around this point, but I can't leave without putting a question on Australia-Malaysia bilateral relations to you both. We've had a bumpy relationship with Malaysia over the years. Under a new PM with the sort of changing political trends that you've both been talking about, can we hope for a stronger bilateral relationship? At least one thing we have in common now is an experience of a revolving door prime ministership, which no doubt makes us a bit more like-minded. What's your take on the bilateral relationship? And Hadi, I might start with you and then go to James for a final word.
Well, if Ismail Sabri is our prime minister, don't expect anything much in terms of international relations. Ismail Sabri is barely a local hero. He's a very much a local player. I don't think he himself ever imagined that he would end up in this position. He is unknown in the international community. He has never held any ministry that is international level. So international relations will be the last thing on his mind. So yeah, we shouldn't expect much.
And James?
Right. So I expect Malaysia-Australia relationship to be stable. I think the history of Malaysia and Australia goes back a long way. Most people do know that we're still part of the Five Powers Defence Pact. The Australian Air Force still have a presence in Penang. To be fair, I think we shouldn't write off Malaysia and Australia in terms of the so-called bad years. In fact, during last few years, Muhyiddin actually brought Malaysia and Australia to a higher plane. They call it strategic partnership. So they actually did move in terms of relationship. So I don't expect the relationship to change. I expect the relationship, in fact, to become stronger now that we've got the free trade agreement. And also, generally speaking, across the Malaysian political spectrum, they see Australia as quite a friendly country. There's a large Malaysian student population here. And also, traditionally, there's been a lot of family connections between the, the elite families in Malaysia and Australia. So for example, there's a huge Malaysian population living in Perth. Most of these people are from the so-called top 25%. So I expect relationships to be very good. It's really an issue of how Australia can promote good governance and promote democracy in Malaysia more than anything else.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time. I think you've both done a terrific job of unpacking the issues for us this afternoon. I certainly learnt quite a bit. So I'd like to say thank you both for that. I'd also like to thank our audience for tuning in. My apologies if we didn't get to all your questions, but I hope where we didn't get to the specifics, we generally covered the spirit of the questions. So thank you again for logging on and posing some interesting questions. I'd like you to keep a lookout for future Asialink events. We're hoping to bring you more of these short, informative sessions. So I'll just say good afternoon from Sydney. Thank you very much.